Woman is disrespected for being in her luxury car, but he discovers she is a judge, and the truth takes him down. Brian Mitchell was sitting in his patrol car, watching the activity in the upscale area of Brookstone, a neighborhood known for its imposing mansions and well-kept streets. He adjusted the rearview mirror, trying not to let the frustration that consumed him show. The city was in constant transformation, but his career seemed stagnant. He listened to his colleagues talk about promotions and recognition, while he remained just an ordinary cop, unnoticed. The routine suffocated, and he felt as if he were trapped in an endless cycle of mediocrity. The weight of unfulfilled expectations pressed on him every day, and he began to question whether all the effort and dedication were truly worth it. "Brian, are you okay?" asked his partner, Tom Andrews, breaking the silence. Tom's tone was gentle, but there was an underlying concern in his voice that Brian ignored. "You seem distant." "Just thinking about life, Tom. I don't know how much longer I can handle this monotony. It's like I'm just here to fill a space. I need something more," Brian replied, looking at the activity on the street. His eyes briefly fixed on a group of teenagers laughing as they walked by, and he felt a pang of envy for their carefree attitude. Maybe a big bust will help change that. Tom's response was a hesitant silence. He didn't want to discourage him, but he also knew that pressure could lead him to rash decisions. He had seen other colleagues succumb to stress, seeking in thoughtless actions a way to prove their worth. Tom was experienced enough to recognize the signs, but friendship and loyalty prevented him from intervening directly. It was then that a luxury car caught Brian's attention. It was a sleek, shiny black sports model that gleamed under the sunlight. The ostentation of the vehicle contrasted with Brian's internal frustration, and an involuntary smile crept onto his face. "Look at that car, Tom. That's suspicious." "Let's see who's driving," Brian said, reaching for the radio, as if that moment could be the turning point he had been waiting for. "Brian, are you sure? It'd just be someone with money. We don't want to cause trouble without reason," Tom advised. Reluctantly, he knew his partner's temperament and feared that frustration could turn into an aggressive approach. But the tone of his voice couldn't disguise the growing apprehension. Tom knew that beneath the surface, Brian was on the brink of a breakdown. "Don't worry, Tom. It's my duty to investigate. I'm not going to let an opportunity slip by," Brian insisted, already speeding toward the car. "Let's go." The adrenaline began to rush through his veins, overshadowing the voice of reason. Brian saw something more in that vehicle than just a car. For him, it was a symbol of what was wrong with his life, the success he didn't have, fortune he couldn't attain. The vehicle stopped, and Brian stepped out of the patrol car with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He adjusted his uniform belt, as if it prepared him for a confrontation. As he approached the luxury car, he noticed the driver was a woman, a calm and self-assured demeanor. Her gaze met his, challenging him to continue. There was something in her serenity that irritated him deeply, as if she knew something he didn't. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Officer Brian Mitchell. Did you know why I'm here?" he asked, without formally introducing himself, his voice rising in tone. His training had instructed him to be courteous and straightforward, but the frustration he carried distorted his approach, turning it into something harsher, almost confrontational. She, maintaining her composure, responded, "Good afternoon, officer. No, I don't. I'm just driving. What's wrong?" Her voice was calm, but it carried an assertiveness that contrasted with Brian's aggressive tone. She was not intimidated, and this only served to heighten his impatience. Brian hesitated, trying to find a response that justified his approach. "That car is too expensive to be here. Can you show me the vehicle's documents?" His voice was sharper than he intended, and he realized at that moment that his justification sounded weak, even to his own ears. He knew something was wrong, but he was unable to admit that the issue lay more with him than with the situation. The woman took a deep breath, remaining calm. "Sure. But may I ask why you think I shouldn't be here? What's wrong with my car?" Her question was direct, and the way it was posed made it clear that she would not be easily intimidated. She watched him with an almost disconcerting serenity, as if expecting him to recognize the irrationality of the situation himself. "I don't like to make assumptions," But you must understand that cars like this are often associated with illegal activity. It's my responsibility to check, Brian said, his voice laden with an accusatory tone that the woman did not seem to accept. He knew he was overstepping, but the need to prove himself was stronger than common sense at that moment. With all due respect, officer, your assumption is unfair. You don't know me, and you shouldn't jump to conclusions without evidence, she replied, firmness in her voice contrasting with the insecurity that Brian felt. Her confidence challenged and irritated him. He was not used to being questioned in this way, and it further undermined his already shaky confidence. Evidence? Let's see what we find, Brian said, trying to take control of the situation, but his frustration was growing, and he could not afford to appear vulnerable. The woman simply looked at him, defiant, and he realized that it would not be easy to intimidate her. That made him even more determined to find something, anything, that would justify his approach. You might want to reconsider your approach, officer. This feels more like harassment than a serious investigation, she said, a restrained smile on her lips, which only irritated him further. Brian braced himself for a confrontation that could cost him more than just a simple misunderstanding. Her words echoed in his mind, and the tension between them began to intensify, foreshadowing a power shift that would change the course of that afternoon. Arlene took a deep breath, trying to remain calm in the face of Brian's hostility. She knew the situation was unfolding unfairly, but indignation could not overshadow her reasoning. The afternoon sun reflected off the car's metallic surfaces, as if trying to illuminate the truth, was being distorted. She was a woman accustomed to confronting difficult situations, but Brian's veiled aggression deeply unsettled her. It wasn't just a matter of power or authority, it was a matter of dignity. Look, officer, I'm not here to cause trouble, she said, her voice firm yet controlled. This car is mine. I bought it legally. I can show you the paperwork if you'd like. Her offer was clear and straightforward, but it carried an underlying tone of fatigue. Fatigue from having to justify what was rightfully hers. Brian interrupted her, his tone heavy with disdain. Paperwork? And who do you think you're fooling? A woman in a luxury car in this area. It's all very convenient, don't you think? He stepped even closer, invading her personal space as if his presence could intimidate her. But Arlene, even feeling the invasion, stood her ground. She knew that giving in was not an option. Arlene Williams was born in a small town in the South, the daughter of a factory worker and a teacher. From an early age, she learned about the harshness of life and the injustices that affected her family. Her father, Robert, lost his job while fighting for better working conditions, which left a deep mark on Arlene, igniting in her an intense desire to combat injustice. In school, Arlene was a brilliant student, standing out despite the challenges. She faced prejudice for being a young black woman, but she transformed those challenges into fuel for growth. By participating in debates and competitions, she discovered her passion for law and justice. When her father passed away due to unsafe working conditions, Arlene decided to pursue a legal career to fight for the rights of the oppressed. With scholarships, she enrolled at Howard University and later at Columbia Law School, where she specialized in civil rights and human rights law. Throughout her career, Arlene dedicated herself to cases of discrimination and abuse of power. Competence and dedication led her to be appointed as a federal judge, one of the few black women to achieve that position. In court, she is known for her impartiality and passion for justice, always remembering her roots and the challenges she faced. Arlene is driven by her commitment to justice and equality, influenced by the adversities she has overcome, and the memory of her parents. She sees herself as an advocate for those, like her family, who are fighting against a system that is often unjust. Tom, Brian's partner, watched the scene with growing discomfort. He knew Brian's approach was wrong, but he felt caught between loyalty to his partner and the need to do the right thing. Brian, maybe we should. I don't know, let her go. She doesn't seem like a criminal, he murmured, trying to ease the tension. His voice, however, betrayed his nervousness. Tom had witnessed situations spiraling out of control due to wounded pride, and he didn't want to see that happen again. Silence, Tom. Brian shot a withering look at his partner. Don't you understand? We need to show who's in charge. Turned back to Arlene, who was now looking at him with a mix of surprise and disappointment. And you should know that respect is earned, not demanded. His words were laden with a cynicism that betrayed his own insecurity. Arlene rolled her eyes, not out of disdain, but out of frustration at being in a situation where her credentials and character were being questioned without reason. I'm not here to discuss respect, officer. I'm here to clarify a misunderstanding. I'm not doing anything wrong. Her response was rational, but there was an undercurrent of frustration. She didn't want to be there justifying the obvious, but she knew she had to maintain control. A misunderstanding, is it? Oh, is that what you call being in a luxury car? Come on, tell me what you were doing here, Brian insisted, his tone rising. He gestured with his hands, as if trying to paint a picture of guilt onto Arlene. It was as if he was clinging to anything that could validate his suspicion. I was leaving a conference, Arlene replied, trying to keep her composure. And please don't make me explain the nature of my work. That's an invasion of my privacy. She felt a knot in her stomach. She couldn't let fear take over. You need to understand that your approach is abusive and unjustified. She knew her words could escalate the situation, but she was determined not to back down. Brian laughed, dry and scornful sound. Oh, you want to lecture me on rights? You think that's going to work with me? You're nothing but a woman in an expensive car, and I'm the cop here. His laughter was more a reflection of his discomfort than real superiority. He felt he was losing control of the situation, but his need to reaffirm his authority blinded him to reality. Tom, increasingly anguished, decided he could no longer stand by. He approached Brian, trying to speak in a softer tone. Brian, maybe we should check the information first. We can't just assume she's wrong. His voice trembled slightly, and he felt a drop of sweat trickle down his forehead. He was torn between loyalty to his partner and the desire to avoid a situation that could escalate into something much worse. You don't know what you're talking about, Tom, Brian replied, agitated. She's exactly what we need to expose. These people always think they're above the law. He was getting lost in his own rhetoric, unable to see beyond the prejudice that blinded him. To him, Arlene represented everything he lacked, and everything he felt he needed to fight against. Brian Mitchell grew up in a small town where authority was respected and success was measured by one's position of power. From a young age, Brian aspired to become a police officer, influenced by the imposing figure of his uncle, also a cop, who was viewed as an unquestionable authority in the community. When he joined the police force, Brian initially believed he was there to maintain order. However, over time, his perspective warped. Frustrated by a lack of recognition and promotions, he began to use his position to assert himself and vent his frustrations. Brian didn't hesitate to abuse his authority, making unnecessarily aggressive approaches, especially against those he deemed inferior or who questioned his authority. Gradually, Brian began to take advantage of his role, accepting small bribes to overlook infractions and intimidating people to get favors. The power went to his head, and he started to believe he was above the law, using his badge as a shield for his abuses. His career, however, stagnated, and the lack of progress left him even more bitter and dangerous. He became a frustrated cop, constantly seeking a big bust to prove himself, but his actions led him down a path of self-destruction, culminating in the incident that would permanently tarnish his career. Tension was mounting, and the air felt heavy with the injustice of the situation. Arlene realized that time was passing and that she needed to act. Listen, I don't want this situation escalating any further. I'm willing to cooperate, but it needs to be done the right way. Her words were calm, but there was a firmness in them that brooked no argument. Before Brian could respond, a man approached the group. He was at a certain distance, but Arlene noticed his gaze was intense and focused. She recognized Samuel Green, an influential attorney in town. He was watching her with concern, and Arlene felt a little more hopeful. If anyone could understand the gravity of the situation, it would be him. Brian, maybe you should think this over, Samuel said, his voice clear and authoritative. You wouldn't want to let this turn into a scandal, would you? Brian, increasingly blinded by his own prejudice, ignored the warning and continued pressing Arlene, determined to prove his superiority, even at the cost of the truth. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and Arlene, even in the face of humiliation and injustice, decided she would not be shaken. She stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. If Brian thought he could intimidate her, he was about to discover that she was not a woman who would be silenced so easily. Brian Mitchell was determined to prove that his approach to Arlene Williams was not just an impulsive action, but a necessary measure to restore order in his jurisdiction. He looked at the woman, observing her unflinching posture, which only heightened his frustration. The idea that a woman, especially one of her standing, could challenge him like this, unafraid, made him even more agitated. He took a deep breath, trying to hide the insecurity forming inside him. "Look, I'm not here to discuss your legitimacy or anything like that. What matters is what you're doing here, with that car, in an area like this," Brian said, his voice sounding rougher than he intended. He approached the vehicle, examining every detail, every mark or scratch that could indicate something suspicious. It was as if he were trying to find a reason, any reason, to justify the approach. Arlene stared back at him, eyes narrowing in a look of disdain. "And what do you think I'm doing here, officer? Coming to a work meeting? What do you really want to know besides humiliating me?" Her voice was sharp, cutting. She was not willing to submit to the power play Brian was trying to impose. Brian hesitated, her provocation catching him off guard. He wasn't used to being challenged like this. "Don't play the victim, ma'am. A car like that doesn't come without a price, and I'm here to make sure you're not involved in anything illegal." His voice was now a mix of frustration and a desperate need to reaffirm his control over the situation. The tension in the air was palpable. Tom, Brian's partner, began to feel that the situation was unraveling the wrong way. Tried to intervene, but Brian's expression made it clear he wouldn't accept advice. "Brian, maybe we should check the information first," Tom suggested, voice hesitant. He felt a chill run down his spine, anticipating that things could escalate quickly if something wasn't done. "Shut up, Tom. You're here to help me, not to slow me down," Brian shot back, not taking his eyes off Arlene. He leaned closer to the car window and, in a brusque gesture, demanded, "Get out of the car, please. We need to check if you have any violations." The tension in his voice revealed that he was close to losing control. Arlene shook her head, indignation growing in her chest. "You don't have the right to take me out of my car without valid justification. That's abuse of power, and I won't tolerate it." Her voice was firm. There was a tremor of emotion that she was trying to control. The injustice of the situation was starting to affect her, but she knew she needed to maintain her composure. Brian, realizing that the situation was not unfolding the way he expected, decided to escalate the pressure. "If you don't get out now, I'm going to have to call for backup, and you won't like the consequence." His words were a desperate attempt to reaffirm his authority, but there was a note of insecurity in them that did not go unnoticed. The woman looked at him, an ironic smile appearing on her lips. "You really don't know who I am, do you? Maybe you should consider listening to what I have to say before making any rash decisions," Arlene said, trying once again to explain her position. Her voice was calm, but loaded with a confidence that only served to heighten Brian's frustration. "I know exactly what you are. A woman trying to use some kind of influence to escape a legal check," Brian shot back, ignoring her suggestion. To him, this was just another example of the kind of attitude he despised. People who believed they were above the law. Outside the car, Tom was visibly uncomfortable. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. "Brian, stop this. Let's verify the information before acting." "It's not worth it," he insisted, his concern growing. He knew that if they continued, the outcome could be disastrous, and he didn't want to be complicit in something that could ruin their careers. But Brian ignored Tom's warning and turned to the car. "I'm going to have to search the vehicle. It's standard procedure when there are suspicions of irregularity." He was determined to assert his authority, even if it meant disrespecting the law. The adrenaline was pumping through his veins, clouding his judgment. Meanwhile, Tom began to search the car, his heart racing. He felt that this was going too far. Brian was becoming increasingly aggressive, and the tension was only escalating. When Tom found a sealed envelope, his stomach churned. He looked at Brian, worried. "Brian, this could be important. I don't know if we should open it." But Brian, already taken over by adrenaline and the need to assert himself, grabbed the envelope and opened it. As he saw the documents inside, his heart raced. He read the first lines, and reality began to unfold before him. "These are confidential documents. You really are hiding something, aren't you?" His voice trembled slightly, but he tried to mask his discomfort with bravado. Arlene's expression changed, not out of fear. It was a mix of disbelief and anger. "You're making a huge mistake, Brian. If only you would listen to what I'm trying to say." She was starting to lose her patience, but she knew that giving in was not an option. Whatever was happening, she wouldn't let him intimidate her. "Oh, so now you want to cooperate? Let's see what else we find," Brian said, increasingly determined to prove he was right. He was so consumed by the need to justify his approach that he completely ignored the signs that he was entering dangerous territory. Tom, increasingly agonized, tried once more to intervene. "Brian, this isn't right. She clearly isn't a criminal. We should have waited for more information before acting like..." His voice was almost pleading now, but Brian was already set on moving forward. "Let's take her to the station. We'll sort this out there," Brian said, completely ignoring Tom's words and Arlene's attempts to explain her situation. He was determined to see this through to the end, convinced he was doing the right thing. Arlene was placed in the back of the police car, her mind spinning with the possibilities of what could happen next. She knew that once they arrived at the station, things would become clearer, but the humiliation of being treated this way burned deeply within her. The drive to the station was tense and silent. Tom tried to process what was happening while Brian kept his eyes fixed on the road, as if convinced he was about to do something important. When they arrived, Brian took Arlene to the interrogation room, where he would finally decide to listen to what she had to say, still holding on to the fixed idea that she was hiding something. "Do you have anything to say before I proceed?" Brian asked, crossing his arms and looking at her with suspicion. Arlene took a deep breath, feeling the indignation bubbling inside her. "I am Arlene Williams, a federal judge, and everything you're doing is a huge mistake," she said firmly, watching Brian's expression change immediately as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. Brian felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He had always felt above right and wrong, but now, amidst those words, the reality of his situation began to crumble. "I didn't know," he tried to justify, but his voice sounded weak, even to his own ears. Tom, who had been watching everything in silence, felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief for finally understanding who she was, and fear of the consequences of what they had done. The room was heavy with the weight of the revelation. Brian, still trying to process, knew he had crossed a line he could never return from. He looked at Arlene, but this time, the arrogance had vanished from his eyes. In its place was only the realization of the enormous mistake he had made. Captain Richard Harris entered the room, sensing the tension in the air and Brian's dazed expression. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice deep and full of authority. Upon hearing Arlene's response, he immediately knew that things had spiraled out of control. "Brian, you are suspended. We will conduct a full investigation into this," said the captain, his voice firm and unwavering. The room was silent, everyone aware of the gravity of what had just occurred. Arlene, still holding her head high, looked at Brian one last time. "I hope you reflect on what you've done, and that this serves as a reminder of the power you carry, how dangerous it can be when used recklessly." Brian was speechless. He knew that his career, his life, might never be the same again, and all because on that day he let his frustration and prejudice speak louder than his duty to serve and protect. With that, Arlene left the precinct, feeling the indignation that had accompanied her transforming into a new determination. She knew she could not let this incident go unnoticed. The experience had strengthened her, and now she was more certain than ever that her voice needed to be heard. The fight against abuse of power and prejudice began now, and Arlene was ready to lead that battle, turning her pain into a powerful force for change. Suspended and on the brink of termination, Brian Mitchell felt the weight of his mistakes like never before. Determined to apologize to Arlene, he realized he would need more than words to redeem himself. Before he could act, Tom intercepted him, suggesting that he deeply reflect on his prejudices before seeking redemption. Tom advised Brian to retire and enroll in re-education courses, emphasizing the need for true internal change. Brian, recognizing the wisdom in his partner's words, decided to follow the advice. He requested early retirement and began dedicating himself to a journey of self-discovery and transformation. Meanwhile, the police department, under pressure, implemented reforms to prevent future injustices. Arlene, now a respected public figure, used her influence to educate police officers and the public about equal treatment, solidifying her mission to promote justice and equality for all. Brian, in search of redemption, embarked on a path of change, determined to become a better person, far from the mistakes of his past. If you enjoyed this story and want to follow more content like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. This way, you won't miss any updates and will stay informed about all our exciting stories. See you in the next video.